What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and it's no surprise, I've been absolutely enjoying Standard. Standard has probably been the best that it's ever been in quite a long time, you know, from Bloomburrow to the Duskmourn set to Foundations onward. I mean, really the format has been slowly getting better and better over time, culminating to this point where I'm actually really excited for the Standard RCQ season. And we actually made a video about a week ago where we were talking about some of the best decks in the format and really the decks that you should look towards playing. If you have some or most of the cards to kind of build those decks, those are going to give you the best opportunity and the best chance to potentially take down a regional championship qualifier or take down your FNM, whatever the case may be. But of course, for a lot of people, Standard has been kind of bad, and even for me, I haven't really been invested into Standard. It was a lot of cards that maybe were printed into Standard that I would kind of pick up for Modern or Pioneer purposes. And today I felt like it was necessary to kind of look at some budget options of the format where they might not necessarily be tier 1 decks, but they are decks that I think are very competitive in the format and definitely are capable of taking down some of the top decks in the format, which is kind of what you're looking for again when you're going to these regional championships, because there are going to be people that are just playing things like Dimir midrange, Golgari midrange, the Gruul aggro decks, Mono Red aggro, and those sort of things. And I think that those being the most played decks, you have these decks here that are able to kind of keep up and can actually in a lot of cases just kind of like ruffle stomp a lot of these tier 1 decks in the format. So if you want to be competitive, you want to play on a budget, these are some budget decks that are going to be very helpful for you to hopefully lock up that invite. But of course, before we get into any of the decks and we talk about what the heck's going on here so you can get competing into the Standard RCQs, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. We're focusing a lot on Standard right now, and we usually cover the RCQ format pretty closely, so Modern, Pioneer, and Standard are going to be kind of in a rotation, as well as some other longer form videos. So if you want to keep checking out those videos, subscribe, ring the notification bell, all that fun stuff. And finally, I want to shout out our sponsor of the channel, Manatraders, where if you use my code in the description down below, you can end up saving 5% off of your monthly subscription, so you can rent some of these cards and decks that you see here on Magic Online, and then you can participate in leagues and even their free tournament series as well. So it's really cool. Lastly, check out the description down below. I have a link to my Discord server. I got a link to the Casual Spikes podcast if you want to check that out for even more content. Check out Randy's channel on the Casual Spikes, my dedicated co-host. But yeah, with all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our first deck that we can play on a budget for probably about $100. So the first deck we're going to look at is Temur Floodcaller combo. This is a very annoying combo deck to play against. It's been something that players brought and played at the World Championship and did reasonably well with, and just seems to kind of stick around and continue to put up results. I know someone like Corey Baumeister, who is a very good Magic player, has kind of sung the praises of this Floodcaller combo deck, and seems like a deck that he's leaning towards playing in the format, just kind of reminiscent of like Temur Breach that we see in Modern. But this deck is very interesting the way that it's built, and just can kind of win the game out of nowhere with some very interesting cards here. So as the name suggests, you are kind of based around Valley Floodcaller, which is a 3-mana 2/2 flash otter wizard that when you may cast your non-creature spells as though they had flash, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, untap them. And we can use this kind of ability in conjunction with something like Enduring Vitality, which is going to allow our creatures to tap to add a mana of any color to our mana pool, essentially giving your otters, frogs, rats, and birds the ability to kind of add mana, cast spells, untap them, throw them, and just continue to add mana to your mana pool. So kind of reminiscent of, like I said, we kind of talked about Temur Breach, where this deck can kind of win the game out of nowhere, and something like a Jeskai Ascendancy kind of combo deck where you're not necessarily drawing and discarding cards or whatever to kind of dig for more gas. Like the deck kind of just does it on its own based on kind of the other cards it has to help out with that sort of thing. So ideally you play like a Valley Floodcaller, Enduring Vitality on the board. You end up playing like Storm Chaser talents that are going to help you to make some otters to help you generate a little bit of mana, so you can get to the point where you can cast a Song of Totentans. for a lot of mana. It's going to make X/1/1 black-rat creature tokens, but this creature can't block, and then creatures you control gain haste. So even if you're playing something like Thundertrap Trainer, or even the otters that you make off of Stormchaser's talent, like that turn, you are able to then give them haste thanks to the song. You end up making a bunch of rats, and then you kind of keep doing this thing where you're like tapping all of your creatures for mana. You're casting things like This Town Ain't Big Enough, where you can kind of bounce some of your own things to get additional triggers, ideally like Up the Beanstalk, something like Roaring Furnace, to where you can have like a removal spell that you can bounce, Bitter Reunion to draw more cards, Stormchaser's Talent, so that you can kind of get this loop going where if you have enough creatures on board, you're actually able to add enough mana to play the Stormchaser's Talent, level it up to level 2, return it as a sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, getting back This Town Ain't Big Enough, and then being able to do that, making a ton of otters, and then eventually on the last kind of iteration, you go get Song, you give them all haste, you have a bunch of big otters because you're triggering prowess with the looping of This Town Ain't Big Enough plus casting a Stormchaser's Talent and attacking your opponent. And that's basically where the deck gets its like power from, and that's how it really ends the game, is that you can kind of go wide with this strategy, or you can go just very tall. Obviously, if your opponent doesn't have any creatures on board, they don't have any untapped mana, it's going to be very easy that with just a Valley Floodcaller and a Thundertrap Trainer, you just kind of like start churning through your deck. You play cards like Analyze the Pollen, Bushwhack to be able to get some of your lands here, so you can ensure that you get land drops. Analyze the Pollen having the additional upside of being able to collect evidence, and when you do collect evidence, you can search for a creature or land card, so you can get any land, any creature, most of the time looking for maybe a Valley Floodcaller or Enduring Vitality, whatever piece that you're missing to kind of get this thing going. And yeah, like this deck is really cool. It's oddly resilient. One of your combo pieces in Enduring Vitality, really, unless you see an Anoint with Affliction from the other side of the board, this is usually going to come back and just kind of sit on the battlefield. You're not really going to be able to untap this or anything like that. Essentially, your opponent will kind of take you off of a mana, but again, not at the same time, because you're going to have Valley Floodcaller, Thundertrap Trainer, these outer tokens from like Stormchaser's Talent, things like that. So you're going to have kind of a lot going on here. And I think it's a deck that currently like people are aware of, but maybe not fully understanding of how this deck actually wins games, or how it really operates, or what it's looking for at any given time. Plus, it has some pretty good interaction with like Torch Tower. Paw Patch Formation has been a very good sideboard card, has made it in some numbers to the main deck. Bushwhack could also technically be a removal spell, as well as Roaring Furnace, again just being able to deal damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to a creature an opponent controls, or on the other side of it, you have no max hand size and you can draw a card and just kind of slowly get some of that advantage. Obviously not nearly as good when sometimes it's going to be something that you bounce with This Town isn't big enough. You don't want to necessarily spend 7 mana on this card to then bounce it and then have to pay another 7 mana to kind of get all those things back, but nonetheless it's still very good in a deck that can keep a reasonable amount of cards in hand while also just again setting up a combo virtually out of nowhere thanks to Valley Floodcaller giving your non-creature spells flash. This isn't necessarily something that you have to go and do this as soon as possible. There's going to be plenty of times where you could play this, with a 2 mana up, and then you play like another 1 mana spell like an Analyze the Pollen or Bushwhack. You trigger the Floodcaller, you have this Enduring Vitality in play, and you're able to play another spell to be able to untap and do a bunch of things. Damage-based removal, you can get a lot of people just by holding off for a little bit and making sure that you have a few spells plus a few mana laying around after you play the Valley Floodcaller in some capacity to make sure that you are able to kind of go off and ensure that you're able to win the game. But it's a very interesting deck. $132, really not that bad. The Copperlight Gorges and the Botanical Sanctums are probably the best pickups for this deck, just because you're going to kind of see a lot of decks I think are going to be really good in the format, just in Gruul and the Simic colors, which Botanical Sanctum will also help with another deck that we're going to look at later. Burst Lightning, Ghost Vacuum are very good cards. Into the Floodmaw is like another card that's really good. More Paw Patch Formations and even Up the Beanstalks, again, for certain decks in the format are also just really good pickups as well to kind of branch out if you decide. And even Questing Druid, I don't know how I forgot that card, but these cards are just very good to have in your collection because they do kind of fit into some of the other strategies available in the format. And of course, they all kind of fit into different parts. but you know, that's just one less thing that you have to pick up if you look to kind of move off of this Temur Floodcaller deck. The next deck we're going to look at is another one of my personal favorites, and was actually a deck that I consider to be like a dark horse of the format, and just kind of does a little bit of everything against everyone, that I think it's just a very solid option to pick up, and it's even cheaper than this Valley Floodcaller deck. So next here we have Jeskai Aggro / Jeskai Convoke. I don't know why, you know, Azorius or Red White or whatever get the Convoke like tag on it, but for some reason this deck doesn't. But Jeskai Aggro / Jeskai Convoke plays exactly kind of how the Red-White Convoke decks played in Pioneer and how they played in Standard before rotation. You're essentially having this big payoff like Knight Errant of Eos, where you're going to be able to play it for free, essentially by tapping a bunch of your creatures that you just played that turn. Then you're going to be able to look at the top 6 cards, hopefully get 2 creatures with mana value XLS. If you end up paying the full Convoke cost of Knight Errant of Eos, then you're going to be able to find more Knights, which can then generate more card advantage. Or ideally, you end up finding a card like Imidane's Recruiter, and it adds just a ton of power to the board when you're able to cast like multiple Gleeful Demolitions and play a bunch of these 1-drops in the early parts of the game. Gleeful Demolition, going back to it, is a key part of this deck because it enables turn 2 Knight Errant of Eoses. If you start with like say a Novice Inspector or a Siren Spyglass on turn 1, and then you follow it up with, you know, if you played Siren on turn 1, we'll say you end up smashing the map token that it makes, you end up having 4 creatures on the board, then you can either with your 1 white mana that you have left over be able to cast it and be able to get creatures with a mana cost 4 or less, or if you have something like a Novice Inspector that you can kind of follow it up with, then you're able to pay the full cost of Knight Errant of Eos and then, you know, be able to get basically every creature in your deck. Going even further, you know, again, Imidane's Recruiter is really good. We have Resolute Reinforcements that are going to make, you know, put 2 bodies on the board for 2 mana. Board in the Inner Sky is just going to get massive and can also help smooth out your draws a little bit, help you look for additional lands, help you look for Knight Errants to kind of get some card advantage going, or even find Imidane's Recruiter, because that's a very key way that this deck is able to just kind of, you know, end the game and push the game to a point where maybe your opponent goes to like 3 or 4 life, but when you have 7 or 8 creatures on the battlefield, it's very hard to deal with, especially in the game 1s where your opponents aren't necessarily playing cards like Choking Miasma or really any of the kind of mass removal that we're used to seeing in sideboards. Here you can see like Shelter by Ghost, Case of the Gateway Express. Case is a sort of kind of removal spell where depending on how many creatures you have on the battlefield is how much damage it's going to do to your opponent, and if you attack with 3 or more creatures that turn, creatures you control are going to get +1/+0. It's going to be another way that again you can just end up pushing a ton of damage with your creatures while also getting big things out of the way when again you're just playing, you know, a bunch of like 1 and 2 mana creatures, and in some cases like 5 mana creatures that you end up paying nothing for. Shelter by Ghost also is like a good way of getting some very annoying permanents off the board while also giving your creatures lifelink. This is kind of a house against the mono red aggro decks and some of the other aggro decks, because you just play like a turn 2 Knight Errant, you know, and they're not able to either, you know, get it off the board, or they end up spending a bunch of spells on it, whatever, you know, they cast a bunch of burn spells, get rid of the Knight Errant, you still slap this on like a Siren, Spyglass Siren, or like a Warden in the Inner Sky, and then all of a sudden like Warden's like a 3/4, or I guess a 4/4 or 5/5 creature flying Vigilance. You're going to be able to hit for 5, gain 5 life, get a Screaming Nemesis off the board, and, you know, just be able to play defense with this kind of card as well, and giving the creature Ward 2 as well, making it so that even if you have on a creature that has like 1 or 2 toughness, like outside of the, you know, the spell can't be countered or whatever, you know, your opponent's gonna have to spend at least 3 mana to get rid of it, and they would rather be spending that 3 mana on either, again, Screaming Nemesises or casting multiple spells to try to get you dead. So even then, like, you can kind of consider it a win, especially if you just pick up something like a Heartfire Hero with this and just reset the counters on it. They only have like 2 or 3 cards in hand. They can only get so big, and chances are you can kind of gain more life than what the mouse will actually be able to deal between attacking and then maybe eventually just blowing up and, you know, dealing a ton of damage to you. There's also a bunch of really good sideboard cards here. You know, we see like, I think Destroy Evil has just always been really good, and it saw less play, and now it's kind of seeing back more play. Lithomantic Barrage as well against some of the, you know, blue-white Oculus decks as well. This is just really good at getting rid of like all the creatures in that deck while not having to really worry about playing against counter spells, in a host of rare lands that, again, you know, these fast lands, Spire Bluff Canals, the Inspiring Vantages are going to be really, really good cards to pick up. Seachrome Coast as well, just really good cards that you want to pick up. These pain lands are super cheap. Battlefield, Adakar, and the Shiv and Reef are all going to be super cheap cards that you can find from like 1,000,001 sets. The Knight Errants and like the rest of these cards aren't really going to put you really into anything else. It's really going to be the mana base plus something like Shelter by Ghost, because this is being a more prominent sideboard card that we're seeing from some of these other decks. So, but nonetheless, I think this deck is really powerful. I've played a few leagues with it, and I've cashed every league so far with it, getting very, very close to some 5-0s, but a lot of 4-1s with this, and I've enjoyed it a lot. You kind of get dumpstered by the mono white decks, but you kind of have a lot of game against a lot of the other decks in the format. And if you can avoid getting Sunfalled or even the temporary lockdown or anything like that, then this deck is just going to absolutely run your opponent over, because sometimes you don't even need the nut draw necessarily to be able to win the game. You just need to have like a fairly aggressive draw out of the gate, try not to get blown out by board wipes, and just kind of set yourself up for games where an Intimidating Recruiter off the top, or just ever finding one, is going to be lethal, which is very easy to do when a lot of people can't necessarily play around that. And with how much damage this adds to the board is absolutely insane. But that is Jeskai aggro. We have one more deck to show you, and it kind of plays in a different style too, and honestly I just recently picked up playing it on Arena, and it's been a lot of fun and I've been enjoying it. So let's go ahead and check out our last deck of the video. So finally, here we have Simic Tempo. This has been a deck that I've seen more people playing it more often, and I've actually beaten this with the Jeskai aggro deck that we just looked at. But this is a lot of fun, and when we're talking about the Teamer Floodcaller combo deck, a lot of the cards for that deck kind of fit into here. So if you end up building this and maybe want to go into that, or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. We can see cards kind of like Up the Beanstalk, Storm Chaser's Talent. This town isn't big enough, being the really big ones into the Flood Maw. If you end up getting one copy of that, you only need to get 2 more. Whatever, the Ghost Vacuum in the sideboard, the Yavimaya Coast, and the Botanical Sanctums, things like that. And for $88, this is a really good deal here, and it's been a lot of fun. So the idea is that you play a bunch of these like cheap spells. You have like Analyze the Pollen and Bushwhack. They're going to be able to look for basic lands, Analyze the Pollen, obviously having a little bit more upside because you're able to collect evidence, go get a creature or land card, which we'll get to here in a minute. But these allow you to kind of search for lands. Bushwhack can also allow you to fight something with our really big creatures that we'll get to, why we're playing these 7 mana cards here in a second. You have like Seed of Hope, that's going to end up milling cards and allow you to put permanent card in your hand. Gain 2 life, going to be really nice in some of the more aggressive matchups. Sleight of Hand, you look at 2 cards, put one to your hand, the other one on the bottom. Unsummon, bounce a creature. Cash Grab, you mill 4, you can put a permanent card from among them into your hand. Really the other part of it, like if it's a squirrel card, whatever, isn't going to matter. And of course, this town ain't big enough, being 5 mana, which is important to note when we're playing a card like Up the Beanstalk, because it says whenever it enters or we cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, we draw a card. So we kind of want these in multiples. Storm Chaser's Talent as well kind of sets us up for some of those loops with like this town ain't big enough, plus like Storm Chaser's Talent where we can make some 1/1s. Or even like with this town ain't big enough, bounce our big creatures here to help us draw more cards. And it's going to be a bigger one when it comes to Eddie Merc Crab, where between this and Tolarian Terror, these cards cost 1 less to cast for each instead of sorcery card in our graveyard. Eddie Merc Crab has the added benefit of tapping up to 2 target creatures when it enters the battlefield, so it's going to enter tapped if it's not our turn. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to tap 2 things and then be able to block, but it still takes 2 things out of commission. Or if we just decide to play it, offensively, we can just tap our opponent's creatures and then get in, a huge attack with our creatures. Tolarian Terror, same thing. You're going to need a few more spells. You're going to end up being able to have this cost 1 mana at the cost of having to have 1 more instant sorcery card in your graveyard. And it's going to have Ward 2 on it, and we know that Ward 2 is pretty big. And when you slap Ward 2 on a 5 toughness creature, it's going to be a little bit harder to deal with, because we're going to be looking at things like Go for the Throw costing 4 mana to get rid of a Tolarian Terror, and you're already going to be kind of set up thanks to Analyze the Pollens and with a bunch of cards that you're kind of okay with, Tolarian Terror like drawing you 1 or 2 cards off of a Beanstalk, and then your opponent spending most of their turn to end up getting rid of 1 Tolarian Terror, when you just seem to like draw these in like packs and end up getting to play like 2 or 3 of them in 1 turn, and then following it up with like playing a bunch of crabs and tapping your opponent's big creatures and being able to get into big attacks. So It's a deck that is certainly interesting. It's been a lot of fun, like the unsummon and like into the Floodmaw style effects. Historically, I would say aren't really all that great. You know, I don't think you necessarily like these cards, just for the fact that, you know, yeah, you could get into some cases where you kind of unsummon a card and your opponent's just kind of put in a bad position because they like tapped out for another creature. It's like, okay, we'll bounce it to your hand, and then like I don't care about like the other creature. But these effects, when you're able to close out the game very quickly with a bunch of big 5/5s, and of course making some otters off of Storm Chaser's talent and a lot of cheap spells, allowing you to kind of get a bunch of prowess triggers to be able to attack through and hit through your opponent, being able to tap down their creatures with the crabs, or just again unsummon them with unsummon and into the Floodmaw. You definitely get into this interesting scenario where if your opponent's just trying to play one threat, you're able to answer it pretty effectively. You know, they're not able to really follow it up with anything else, and you're able to max punish them by just absolutely tempoing them out of the game. So again, like there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. You know, we have like Paw Patch Formation has been a great like standard staple. Ghost Vacuum, these lands as well. You have My Coast, Botanical Sanctum. We don't really see a lot of the Surveil lands come up in a lot of these budget decks. I think that Surveil lands are very good, just usually in like blue black and the green black decks. But you know, Hedge Maze, if you decide that you want to play into something like Domain, you know, you already have the Up the Beanstalks, you have the Hedge Mazes and things like that. You just have to get some other Surveil lands in there as well, and then of course a lot of the sideboard cards that kind of fit into that deck as well. You can end up getting here, and you know, have most of your sideboard kind of set up for most of the colors that you want to play in the format. But yeah, that's the short and sweet of the semi-tempo deck. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed playing this deck, and I've enjoyed really playing a lot of the decks on here. Like Team Reflect Color is not something I'm super familiar with, but it's a deck that nonetheless I've seen a lot of people play, and it looks like a lot of fun. The Jeskai Convoke deck I think is absolutely cracked. I absolutely enjoy it. It's the deck that I really want to play through this like standard period up until, you know, we get the next set Aether Drift to come out, and this Simic Tempo deck I kind of look forward to jamming some more games with, because again, it just is a lot of fun to kind of like play this deck and just kind of how it works. And again, I think also a lot of the time that players don't really understand how a lot of these decks work, so I think that if you can get a pretty good understanding of how they work as the pilot, you can kind of win a lot of games just on the fact that your opponent might not necessarily be familiar with how these decks operate or what's in them, what they're going to do, and you can get some extra bonus points, you know, some percentage points in your direction there. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope y'all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you would like to see next. I plan on doing a lot of standard stuff here coming up. I really want to get another sort of like fun-ish video out, and of course jam some leagues with some of these amazing standard decks. So hopefully y'all stick around for that. We're gonna try to add live streaming a little bit more to our repertoire as well. So again, if that's something that interests you, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell. You'll know when my videos and stuff get posted. Really do greatly appreciate all the support. That's going to do it for me in this video. Hope y'all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.